puzzle for us, the final question we have is engineering. Once we figure out what the evidence base is, once we figure out how to effectively delegate and make sure someone is accountable for it is being managed well, that we know what we're talking about, we then have to invest in our infrastructure, and we have to engineer the natural infrastructure in the same way as we engineer the concrete that we love so much, to make sure it is most efficient and optimally producing the benefits that we want it to produce. And as part of that, there's basically two underlying issues that we think are important to ensure that we can successfully achieve this natural infrastructure alphabet. First is that any attempt to scale up must invest in policy fundamentals. We have to get the policy right, because if we don't, any attempt to invest in natural infrastructure can potentially worsen the problem. We have to get the policy right. And then the second thing we have to get right is we have to set clear objectives for what we expect the natural infrastructure to achieve. I mean, when we talk about water, for example, for us, the type of objective we set in our water sector is increasing productivity per unit of water. So I think this is where, as a conservation community, we have to be very careful about why we're in this business of natural infrastructure. It can't be about biodiversity conservation. It has to be about increasing productivity per unit of water, increasing productivity of land. What is it we're trying to do with the natural infrastructure? We hope and we believe we can invest in design natural infrastructure such that biodiversity is a co-benefit, but that cannot be our measure of success. We cannot invest in natural infrastructure for adaptation if all we care about is whether or not the mangroves are successful nurseries for fish, if what we intended it to do is protect people from stormwater sewage. So those are the questions we have at the bank. We'd be very excited to scale up, but we don't think we're there yet. We think there's a clear path forward, and we do have to travel that path.
Thank you, Valerie, for a so great assessment of the state of the art. And did everyone get their ABCDE of green infrastructure? Because one of your last points was the importance of getting the policy framework right if this is going to be successful, which is a nice segue to now. What do we need to do to get, and what do we know about how to get those policy frameworks right?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Going back to the last presentation, I first trying to get it. Thank you very much. To get the policy framework right, I try to get just a review, short review of the Dutch policy and how we are working on investing in natural infrastructure as part of the development cooperation and how we come to that. I shall try to guide you quickly in a kind of 5 to 7 minutes presentation through this, what we are doing. In first having a quick look at development cooperation, mainstreaming environment, because that's one of the issues, natural infrastructure, the Dutch experience showing where we come from, and then maybe how we are going to increase it in our development cooperation. The challenges I will leave because I think there are other questions prepared for us again. First, water for development. In the Dutch development cooperation, it is one of the 4 main focus areas. And of this focus area, the most important themes are water use efficiency, focusing on agriculture, integrated water resource management, and watch the drinking water. And it is, as Andrew said, 4 years ago, the focus was on drinking water and sanitation, and everybody was talking about that related to MDGs, also the Dutch policy. We forgot about the integrated water resource management. We've been doing that 10 years ago or something like that. It was sleeping, and it's now awakening. So we are trying to wake up and see, okay, what are we going to do with this, and how are we going to link these 3 elements, water for agriculture, wash, and integrated water resource management. We will increase our budget the coming years to see how we're going to do this, and we're closely cooperating with the Dutch water sector and trying to use their experience on this. But in the Dutch development policy, in the past we had a very big environmental program focusing on forests, on wetlands. And what is important now is mainstreaming the environment and development policy. It is maybe, as Valerie said, it's not conservation because of conservation, it's conservation because we need to address other goals, and conservation is a means to realize that. And if biodiversity comes in, then that's a kind of co-benefit. It means also mainstreaming in water and food security. It's another priority area I will not tackle on this in this presentation. And it also means much more focusing on the economic part, the economic aspect, because we think that's the driver of the whole process. And if you don't have this drive behind it, it will be very difficult. So the programs we had in the past, we're now trying to, let's say, swap and see, okay, how we are going to include in an efficient water program. And when you talk about ecosystem functions as natural infrastructure, you can talk about forests, for instance, in the upper part of a watershed. You can talk about wetlands, the lower wetlands that are buffering, for instance, the buffering capacity, so floodplains that are a kind of coastal protection. So these can all be included in our program. But it is extremely difficult realization of mainstream. What we do is we use the existing instruments. The last couple of years we've built quite a lot of experience around public-private partnerships. They mostly focus on value chains though, and I think the new and exciting challenge is how we can also focus on, for instance, much more a kind of landscape approach or a watershed approach and using public-private partnership, and meanwhile focus on sustainability. But it also means that we need to trigger some initiatives. For instance, there's been a launch on public-private partnerships from the water sector just recently. It's a call for ideas, proposals, and I think there came like around 100 proposals. But one of the conditions was sustainability, and sustainability is translated in this case, and it was a request from Parliament, in FIETS. FIETS is the Dutch word for cycle, and FIETS it means a financial and institutional and environmental, and technical and social sustainability. So most of these public-private partnerships need to look at this, and what we see now that some of these are including natural infrastructure as kind of startup. Then the second one, where we focused on in the past, kind of sleeping, was payments for environmental services and valuation. One of the things we did was we worked with some NGOs on piloting experiences at community level. One of the interesting things is we did it with WWF in the Netherlands, and they cooperated with CARE in the USA. And the project that Nina was mentioning in the beginning in Tanzania, in the Uluguru Mountains, is a cooperation between CARE and WWF, exactly to have the natural and the productive part of it. And it's interesting to see that this project, DFinance, comes to an end, and next month, I think in October, the WWF will present all these experiences in 6 countries, also in China, in Guatemala, in Peru, in Tanzania, where they've been doing this, to see how this can be replicated, used as best practices, what do we learn from it, and also how can we include it in our policies. Then the other thing is evaluation, and it's mentioned by Nick. We need to pay attention to valuation, otherwise we are not going to know what will be actually the value of the ecosystems. We've been doing it in the Netherlands through a kind of Team Netherlands, and we want to do it internationally through the WAVES program of the World Bank, and link up with that WAVES program and see, okay, how we can link these different types of valuation and see what comes up, and include it in national thinking, national economic and planning thinking, because that's essential if you want to go to these aspects. And then finally, investment fund. We are thinking of, okay, is it possible to get a kind of green growth investment fund up and running? Assess the options for environmental infrastructure investments. We've been talking to the Dutch Development Bank, the FMO. They say, well, there is quite some possibility outside where we can invest our funds and trigger and stimulate and facilitate these investments. So we are now trying to scope what do we need to do then. So these are realizations of mainstreaming in the water program. Then we are building on the Dutch examples, and I want to show you a couple of examples of the natural infrastructure and the Dutch experience. It's along, let's say, 3 lines. First, the Dutch may be famous for their water engineering, because Holland is a small country below sea level, so the delta approach is quite dominant in all the coastal areas and coastal protections. It's long-term planning, it's driven by private sector, government, and it's all about security and safety. That's the main goal. And we've been building a lot in concrete in the past. I think that's maybe not Fabio tells it. Concrete engineering has been mainly driven dikes and dams and everything. Then there's a lot of knowledge in the private sector institutes, and what you see the last couple of years, there's more and more based on these concrete engineering, green adaptation in water management and water-driven solutions. Green adaptations is a new concept that we are working with. And what is interesting to see that these green adaptation strategies are coming from the engineering community. Also civil society, environmental and nature organizations working in the Netherlands, link up, come with solutions based on, for instance, wetland lakes, smaller rivers, natural landscape, and they are forming a coalition. And I think in 2 months' time they're going to sign a kind of MOU where engineering and conservation community will meet each other and see how they can strengthen each other. Let me show two of the big examples that came out of, let's say, this new re-engineering, or this kind of what I saw yesterday or day before yesterday in the nature conservation session built on climate adaptation. If you see, one of the examples is a hybrid approach to natural infrastructure. It's room for the river, as we call it, because we've been building dikes along the rivers, and then suddenly there was this threat of inundation a couple of years ago. So we need to realize that we need to have water buffering. So we're restoring the natural dynamics and the morphology of the river basin to improve safety, create recreational rooms, natural values along the riverside. That's a big program that's running now in the Netherlands. And the second example, which I also saw yesterday, the same picture, is building with nature the sand engine, as we call it. It's like 1 by 2 kilometers, big island off the coast in Holland, and it's for instance for the natural sand suppletion, because as Holland is lying below the sea level, annually there needs to be a natural sand suppletion to the beaches, because otherwise they will just erode. The idea is building an island and then using the stream and the forces of the water to gradually build a new, let's say, water protection along the lines, instead of having every year to do this mechanical sand suppletion. So it's now in place, and we are wondering how it's going to work, but it's an interesting experiment. So coming to the end, we use these experiences in development cooperation. We do it in like 12 bilateral partner countries where we work on integrated water resource management and support different activities. We want to strengthen this, let's say, sustainability component, try to use this natural infrastructure. There's an example in the Vietnam Delta plan where, together with the Vietnamese governments and partners, has been working on a plan how you can, for instance, the Mekong Delta, have a protection area also using natural protection. And there's a new idea with which we are working now is sustainable land and water management, see how we can create much more synergy. And I demonstrate the example of the engineering company and the conservation community in Holland, but also how we can use this synergy and create it to also, in partner countries, have much more a kind of coalition working instead of loose initiatives, and using this to strengthen natural infrastructure and landscape initiatives. We at the beginning, we have a kind of first assessment being held in Holland among parties, whether they're interested in cooperation. It seems they're interested. Coming, let's say, 6 months, we will continue, and we hope this is something which can support and facilitate our activities in 12 partner countries. Challenges I will leave to Mark, and thank you very much.
So we're about to move to breakout groups to go into each of those 4 issues in more detail. But before we do that, I want to take a minute to ask if there are any clarifying questions, short, quick questions to any of the panelists on any of the 4 presentations before we go into the breakout groups. Yeah, 2 mics here, but please do make them quick and clarifying.
Merci. Est-ce qu'on peut déjà poser des questions? Moi c'est Alphonse Mouindo. Je travaille pour le réseau CREF, c'est un réseau d'ONG au Nord Kivu, à la République démocratique du Congo. J'ai beaucoup apprécié les différentes expériences qui ont été développées, mais j'ai une difficulté à comprendre quel a été le rôle et la place des communautés rurales dans toutes ces expériences. Merci.
Okay, so for those who didn't have my needed translation, basically the question was, what is the role and the place of local communities in the different solutions that are being offered here? Anyone wants to take a quick stab at that, or it's certainly an issue worth raising in working in the breakout groups, but.
I know very briefly, and if I can answer from the perspective of the World Bank, for us, green growth is only useful if it is inclusive. And because we use natural infrastructure, particularly in rural communities, because the old-fashioned concrete approach to infrastructure just isn't cost-effective and it won't arrive early enough to spur green growth. We use natural infrastructure in places where for us to make sure that that natural infrastructure is managed, to make sure that the benefits and the services are equally distributed, we have to work with communities. These are community assets. These are your resources. It's your management, and you have to be accountable to manage them. So for us, the communities are at the center of any approach to natural infrastructure.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to ask any other quick clarifying questions?
Yes, for Netherlands, we're considering restoring an urban river in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Is there any cost-benefit analysis for the restoration of your river?
Well, there's been quite a lot of, let's say, engineering around this and calculation around this. I wouldn't know about the cost-benefit analysis right from my head, but I think it's worth informing, because it definitely must be something like cost-benefit assessment or assessment